Ronald Bucca was a New York City fire marshal, a 22-year veteran of the department who also served in the U.S. Army as a Green Beret during Vietnam. In 1986, he became a reservist joining the Fire Department of New York in Rescue 1, one of the oldest rescue companies in all of New York. And he survived a spectacular fall in that same year, falling through 5 floors while attempting to rescue a lieutenant who was trapped on the 4th floor of the tenement. Bucca was not expected to live and could have retired on a $250,000 tax-free pension at the age of 32. But he vowed to return to the FDNY and Rescue 1, in which he did a year later. Ronnie Bucca became a legend throughout the FDNY and was adequately nicknamed the Flying Fireman. But because he was doing paratrooper training as a reservist, he switched positions due to his injured back by working as a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst. After responding to the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, Ronnie had a personal interest in investigating the matter due to the incident involving longtime friend and fellow firefighter Kevin Shea, who had fallen 4 stories into the impact hole left by the urea nitrate bomb, which was placed in the Ryder truck, in which Shea inspected himself. The incident with Kevin Shea was dramatized and also played by George Clooney in the 1993 made-for-TV movie Without Warning, Terror in the Towers, which was aired on NBC. The FBI had shut out the local fire department investigators who could have contributed to the federal investigation. So Ronnie then educated himself about Middle East and Islamic terrorism and began his own personal probe. He would document thousands of files himself. He told dozens of people over the years that he was convinced that there was going to be another attack on the World Trade Center once again. In September of 1999, for 9 months, Ronnie was working at Metrotech, one of the more modern secure buildings which contained plans for virtually all of the major building structures in New York City, and was also one of the new fire department headquarters in Brooklyn. One day in his cubicle doing some paperwork, Bucca overheard 2 fire marshals talking about an incident that occurred just a few days earlier, where an accountant claimed to have lost his ID on a PATH train to New Jersey, but that there was something suspiciously wrong. According to the general rule working in the building, if you lost your ID, you had to tell fire marshals immediately, in which they did affirm that when they spoke to this accountant and asked if he filed a lost access card report, the accountant said he did. But when the same 2 fire marshals came in the next morning and found the report card filled out, not only was there something wrong with the timing of the report, but it was also signed by the name of a fire marshal who was also on vacation at the time of the signature. As one would obviously conclude, it must have been forged. But by whom? While the fire marshals were explaining the situation to Ronnie, they said the accountant was Egyptian. Ronnie became so compelled to act on his suspicions and wanted to know more about this accountant and why they would go through so much trouble to get a new ID. That accountant's name was Ahmed Amin Rafai, who was a naturalized Egyptian citizen and an FDY accountant for 25 years. On a hunch, Ronnie started taking a closer look at Rafai and went down to observe videotape taken of Rafai, which clearly showed that his reportedly lost ID card was actually in his back pocket when he was requesting a new one, and that later the security video showed him swiping his ID card through the reader and entering Metrotech. Rafai was interviewed later, but gave conflicting information to the supervisor. His ultimate answer for getting a new ID card was for, quote, nostalgic reasons. Ronnie wondered why an experienced, long-standing accountant would risk his entire career and reputation for simply lying over a lost card. Nostalgic reasons? Or something more? Bucca continued to press forward as to why the risks Rafai took. Ronnie ended up commiserating with his boss, who was also Rafai's supervisor, Kay Woods, who is now Deputy Assistant Commissioner. He asked her what kind of an employee Rafai had been. Woods in return rolled her eyes and said, this guy was like a ghost employee. He would come in late, took every vacation, would fall asleep at his desk, and make calls to his native home of Egypt. He was like a non-entity in the department. Ronnie then asked Woods if Rafai had ever done anything else unusual that she observed. Woods said that in the early 1990s, prior to the first World Trade Center bombing, while the capital budget unit was being renovated, where she and Rafai were located previously, that there was a time that Rafai got hold of blueprints to the World Trade Center. A large number of blueprints to New York City, more notable buildings, were kept in the inspection department located inside the filing cabinets that were thrown out into 2 large dumpsters. When one day, Kay was at lunch and came back to finding Rafai digging through the dumpsters and found the World Trade Center blueprints on his desk. Woods specifically remembered Rafai asking about the blueprints. "Can I have these?" At the time, she thought nothing of it. The day of the first World Trade Center bombing, Rafai called in sick. He then became extremely paranoid. Woods described a pattern where he told her that he thought the FBI was bugging his garage. After listening to Woods' experiences with Rafai, Bucca was aghast. It confirmed his initial suspicions about why Rafai was acting so irresponsible regarding the ID pass. Ronnie went to a local news channel where he knew a film editor he then asked to view some news archives. And after looking at the 4th or 5th videotape, he found one, showing Rafai on the arm of the notorious Egyptian radical Islamic militant Omar Abdel Rahman, the Blind Sheikh. He was acting as his bodyguard, moving him through the crowd while whispering in his ear. Rafai, seen here with one of the most notorious radical fundamentalists in the world, Bucca was left astonished. Ronnie then discovered that the FBI had interviewed him twice in 1994. But more specifically, Ronnie found out from people in the fire department that Rafai had been seen in the new footage walking near the Blind Sheikh holding his arm. Given his knowledge of the Egyptians and the role that they played early with the Blind Sheikh and the New York landmarks plot and the first World Trade Center bombing, Bucca was convinced he was an Al-Qaeda operative. Ronnie rushes this information of Rafai obtaining plans at the World Trade Center and brings it to the FBI field headquarters in New York in September of 1999. Agents at the New York field office refused to listen to his observations. One of the agents even told Bucca, "Well, we don't see any crime here. There is nothing we could do." Bucca was absolutely stunned at the refusal to even take his account seriously. But that didn't stop Ronnie, as he had access to information the public did not, and he intensely investigated more and kept a bird's eye on the Twin Tower. 1 month before the 9/11 attacks, he visited one of the security guards at the World Trade Center and inquired whether there were any new means of egress that could allow anyone to the World Trade Center from below. On Tuesday morning, September 11, 2001, after American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., Ronnie roared down lights and sirens to Liberty Street alongside his partner, Fire Marshal Jimmy Devery. They parked, donned their turnout coats, and made their way in the backstairs of the South Tower, where United Airlines 175 had just struck. Ronnie actually reached the impact zone of the 78th floor of the South Tower, along with Battalion Chief Oriel Palmer, who devised a plan to put out the fire. The two men were the only firefighters who made it that far, as both were experienced marathon runners.
Okay, 7, 15. We got 2 isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. Where you know that? 78th floor, numerous 1045 code 1s.
1045 code 1s means dead bodies.
Chief, what stand you in? South Stanley, Adam, South Tower. 478. 10-4 over here. Numerous civilians, we're going to get 2 engines up here. All right, 10-4, we're on our way.
At the impact zone, up on the 78th floor, Chief Oriel Palmer and Fire Marshal Ronald Bucca stay to fight the blaze among the dead and the dying. Palmer again tries to reach members of Ladder Company 15.
Battalion 7, Ladder 15.
It is the last time anyone hears from either Chief Palmer or Fire Marshal Bucca.
But as the flames roared around them, the steel buckled, which led to an eventual collapse. Both men perished as the tower crumbled down straight to the bottom. Ronnie Bucca was the only firefighter marshal in the history of the New York City Fire Department to be killed in the line of duty. Fire Marshal Devery, who was with Bucca earlier, had rescued a badly burned woman named Ling Young on the 51st floor and got her to safety. Both survived. Author Peter Lance extensively documents the story of Ronnie Bucca and his discovery of Ahmed Rafai in his first self-authored investigative trilogy of 9/11, 1,000 Years for Revenge, International Terrorism, the FBI, The Untold Story. Lance was able to get detailed and personal information from Bucca's wife and those close to him, and decided to continue investigating his angle by confronting Rafai. Veteran FBI agents Joe O'Brien, with his partner, organized crime expert Andy Currens, went with Peter Lance to interview Rafai for his first book, and wanted to give him an opportunity to respond to what he was told. Rafai admitted that he did act as Sheikh's translator at his INS hearing. He admitted that he was a member of the Masjid al-Salam Mosque in Jersey City, and that he frequented the other 2 mosques in Brooklyn where the Sheikh used to preach. During the 45-minute interview, Lance asked Rafai 4 times if he would renounce the Blind Sheikh, in which each time he refused to renounce him. Lance showed him a video still of him next to the blind sheikh, and Rafai admitted that that was him, but he denied that he obtained the plans to the World Trade Center, or that he had called in sick on the day of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Rafai stated that he was just a member of the mosque, that he was walking the sheikh to an immigration hearing as his translator. Lance then pressed and asked him, "Well, did you know Mahmoud Abalima?" To which Rafai replied, "Yes, I know him." "Did you know Muhammad Salameh?" "Yes, I know him." "Did you know Nidal Ayad?" "Yes, I knew him." "Did you know El Said Nosser?" "Yes, I knew him. But I do not really know these men. In other words, I was only acquainted with them." At the very end of the interview, Lance asked him at one point, "How did you feel about 9/11? Rafai paused, tried to fake a weepy-eyed kind of expression, and said, "I went to the park in the town, and I hold a candle for these people." Lance also opined, "He started to get like he was remorseful, but not for long. I really pressed this guy hard." Rafai had a subtle change into his sudden emotion, but not for long, according to Lance, as he kept pressing on Rafai about his relationship with the blind sheikh, in which, after a few minutes, Rafai had finally lost it, and said, "Do you know why the FBI did not discover 9/11? Lance couldn't comprehend, but he responded to Rafai saying, "Well, that's what my book seeks to answer," to which Rafai replied, "No. Do you understand what my people believe? This is not bin Laden. This is not the sheikh. This is the United States government doing this for Israel." Lance looked over at the other surprised FBI agents, and they were all aghast at Rafai's statement. Lance had replied, "Let me get this straight. You are saying that your people believe that the 3,000 people were murdered by the United States government on behalf of the state of Israel?" Rafai made final proclamation, "Yes, this is what my people believe." Lance just thought it was absurd, which resulted in the end of the interview with Lance and the FBI agents leaving the house.